thank you all for joining us.
Thank you for being with us today. I'd like to start with you, Ms. Hemingway. Is the suppression of dissenting viewpoints under the broad banner, the auspices of fighting disinformation, is that something that, in your view, is eroding public trust in the media and in big tech?
It's interesting that so much of the censorship took place in the context of how to respond to the global pandemic, because the idea was they'll suppress different ideas about how to respond, and therefore everyone will agree with public health officials or the corporate media. Studies indicate that, in fact, the opposite happened. Trust in public health officials who were protected from any criticism or any pushback has plummeted, and of course, trust in corporate media almost could not be lower.
Didn't end up quite the way they wanted it to, did it? Have any big tech companies or big tech CEOs funded any anti-free speech NGOs that you're aware of?
Well, the industry is massive and works together, and so they fund each other constantly, including purchasing blacklisting tools from NGOs that may have themselves been started by federal agencies, and that's what keeps them going. And it's this public-private partnership, which is what makes it so disconcerting. It's not just private entities trying to destroy my publication. Right. It's that they were funded by the government and assisted with other governments.
The combination of them, the alliance that turns it into one gigantic self-licking ice cream cone of sorts. You familiar with a group called the Center for Tech and Civic Life?
I am.
This is an entity that, of course, hosted election misinformation ceremonies, seminars, rather, as recently as last July. Do you know who funded that entity?
Yeah, it was interesting because someone was talking about big tech support for the Trump administration, but the most impressive big tech support ever was under the Center for Tech and Civic Life and the Center for Election Innovation Research. Both entities funded by Mark Zuckerberg to the tune of $430 million in the 2020 election. And they were engaged in election interference activities, the private takeover of government election offices in the blue areas of swing states. It was really important and really influential. And then also, they were part of the effort to suppress any discussion about election. Elections are one of the most important things that people should have free and open debate about, because if we don't have trust in our elections, if we don't have good elections, we don't have self-government. And so it's very important that that not be censored as well.
Right. It's interesting. So you would say that the big tech giants were active participants in what we're referring to as the censorship industrial complex that suppressed the free speech of American citizens in many cases.
Most notably, I would also point out, in the 2020 election, when the Hunter Biden laptop was under discussion, it was published by the New York Post, there had been massive NGO participation in preparing journalists to say that if a story like that came out, that they would suppress it. And they did. You saw many media outlets like NPR say, we're not going to cover this story. You saw big tech giants say, we're not going to allow you to discuss this story, even in your private messages. That happened on Facebook and it happened on Twitter. You even had the press secretary of the United States not being allowed to post information about an inarguably important story, whether the Biden family business involved taking money from corrupt oligarchs in exchange for access to people in power. There's no debate about whether that was an important story, and yet it was violently suppressed from the landscape.
Right. And you don't have that sort of thing happen without malice of forethought, or at least without a lot of advanced preparation. You even had people coming to the Senate asking to brief members of the Senate in a secured classified information facility, telling us that something was about to come out about a family member of a presidential candidate and that we should not discuss it because it would be untrue. And I asked them, how is it that we're supposed to know what it is that's not true if we don't know what the thing is? They didn't have a good answer for that. Mr. Weingarten, you described Mark Zuckerberg as, quote, one of the individuals most responsible for the censorship industrial complex. You said this, I believe, in January. Can you elaborate on what that means?
Well, I think to the point of your exchange, Senator, he is someone, and he represents an organization that served as essentially a witting tool of government pressure to suppress wrongthink. They also funded and incorporated the fact checkers who allowed them to outsource what amounted to subjective censorship decisions. And I think we've seen a mea culpa now, and it would have been useful had Mr. Zuckerberg interceded in the Supreme Court case where this very conduct was at issue.
Right. So in light of that, can big tech really be trusted to dismantle the censorship industrial complex in light of the fact that they built it?
Big tech will do what it perceives to be in its interest.
As any organism might do. Professor Turley, to what extent should government-funded institutions and government-funded non-profit organizations be involved in defining and combating misinformation and disinformation?
I would put that near, if not at zero. One of the things that I mentioned in the book is that many of the terms we use today actually were used at the beginning of the Republic when the First Amendment was designed. These are not new arguments. Free speech is something that's easier to behold at a distance. But when you ask people, you talk about the McCarthy period, and they're horrified. And then you say, well, how about the censoring, blacklisting, throttling today? And they go, oh, well, that's different. We have to fight disinformation. These are the same voices. They've been with us for ages. They're making the same arguments. Everyone uses as an excuse that this is why I should be able to silence my neighbors. And it costs not just politically. When you talk about COVID, I spoke at the University of Chicago, and most of the people that signed the Great Barrington Statement were there. And I asked many of these scientists who have been vindicated in many of their views, how many of you have been restored to your positions? How many of you that were fired were invited back? Zero. And the point I'm only raising is when we talk about the cost to free speech, we never had that debate during COVID, not a robust debate of the masks, the 6-foot rule, natural immunities. That's the cost of free speech. It has a direct impact on American citizens.
That's it. Mr. Chairman, if I can follow a quick follow-up question on this. So that creates a good picture of the grave risks involved concerning the long-term consequences of allowing and even encouraging increased collaboration between government entities, big tech firms, and academic institutions, insofar as they can do what Ms. Hemingway described a moment ago, of creating a kind of a collusive understanding and agreement in advance. We're all going to agree that this is the truth, right? What are the long-term consequences of that happening, that kind of collusion between things like academic institutions, government entities, and government-funded entities, and big tech firms?
Yeah, that's something that I think really has to be kept in mind. We've had anti-free speech movements in our history. We've never seen anything like this one. We've never seen a coalition of corporations, academia, the media, the government join together in this way. And it succeeded to an extent that I find truly chilling. And they've had a setback. They've lost X. Apparently Meta is stepping back from some of its censorship. And so they're going old school. They're turning to the EU. They're turning to countries like Brazil to start to use government power. And this fight is just beginning. And that's the reason I talk about the World Forum in Berlin. That was one of the most anti-free speech gatherings I have ever been at. There were 2 of us, both American, from the free speech community. And so this fight is just beginning.
Thank you so much. And it's especially heartening to hear you describe what I think a lot of Americans intuitively understand, which is stuff goes back to the 1790s. It's not as though modern technology has presented us with purely unique sui generis questions. There are some challenges that come up, but the fundamental question of the government's ability to censor, those legal issues haven't changed. There's nothing about the technology that obliterates or creates a carve-out from the First Amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I suppose in the irony of all ironies, I just